it was never the big dream. I never thought of anything that could do this.
As someone who worked on Hitman, one of my
Yeah.
favorite games, how did you leave?
So the idea of subscription was really new then. And we thought, okay, you know what? People who play games, they also listen to music. They also watch movies. It means that you have a lot of personal freedom, let's say, taken away from you or sort of suspended for a period of time. I think we had this huge explosion in games companies and number of games. That's going to go down because it's becoming unsustainable, I think.
Hello, everyone. I'm Batuan from Mobidictum. Today, I have a very good friend of mine, Teis Anker Mikkelsen from Copenhagen, Denmark. He is the founder and CEO of Multiscription. They're building a subscription service tool for mobile games called Unleashed. We know each other for almost more than 3 years ago. Yes, you know the times pass very quickly when you're in this space, especially. Thijs, welcome to show. Yeah, so let's start with your career. How did you start in the working life, and when did you jump to gaming space?
Yeah, actually, I'm really proud to say this, but I never thought about working in games. It was never the big dream. I never thought of anything that could do this. And for me, games, I love playing games as a kid and as a teenager. I played a lot of games, but it never occurred to me that they were made by people. First of all, because when I grew up with games, it was the Amiga 500. I had one game I had bought, the rest you copied back then. So the idea of stealing other people's games wasn't that a big thing back then. So I never thought about it. And the reason I say I'm proud to say this is because I'm really happy to be one of those that are coming into the industry who didn't grow up a hardcore gamer, right? That we are expanding and diversifying the industry to not just be for hardcore gamers ourselves, making games for other hardcore gamers, but just for, ordinary people such as myself, making games for other ordinary people. So I think that's something I'm really happy with. And actually, I studied law. I have a master's degree in law, and I spent a few years in the Danish Army as well. So that's normally a very different career path than going into games. And I stumbled upon games. That's a complete coincidence. As a tester back in the day, as a play tester, just testing for fun, and I totally fell in love with the people first of all in the industry, the people I met, and also just the idea of creating these experiences for people that we take the most difficult and most fun parts of a creative development. We have everything from game design to just UI UX design to audio to visuals, everything, and then we combine that with cutting edge technology. And I think that's it's so exciting to be part of. So yeah, that was my sort of way into it, and then went into PC console back in early 2000s, and did that for a number of years, and then moved to more web and mobile, and then most recently to mobile. So that was sort of my way through this and my way into games. And I'm really excited about the industry. I had a short stint outside of it, but I really missed working in games.
All right. But so you worked on Hitman.
Yes.
iOS Interactive.
Yes.
So as someone who worked on Hitman, one of my favorite games, how did you leave making the Hitman part and then move to mobile? Like, what got your interest working on mobile games, considering like PC and console?
So I would say, first of all, working at IO was actually a recent dream come true. It wasn't a lifelong dream because I didn't know about IO Interactive until a few years before I joined. Once I joined, they were at the time the biggest company in Denmark, and had since turned out a bit like working at IO, working on Hitman is a bit like conscription here in Denmark. Something everyone has to go through if you're part of the industry. You have to work at IO. And I really enjoyed it, really enjoyed my time there. I think what I liked about mobile, where I wanted to go, was that the teams were much, much smaller. The iterations were much faster. I think there's something very extraordinary of working on a big team, several hundred people working for multiple years on a game. But what I liked even more was working with smaller teams on games that you could release much faster and get the immediate feedback from players. The idea of soft launching, the idea of making iterations and releasing weekly, bi-weekly, new features, new content, small updates, instead of sitting basically in a cave for 4 or 5 years, and then you release something which flops because you had a bad pre-rendered trailer for E3, right? That's or the other way around. Sells really well, but then people don't like it because they bought it based on the trailer, whatever. So I think I really enjoyed that part in mobile, and I also think that mobile, because it's a newer part of the industry, again, at that time had more diversity in it in terms of different people, different skill sets, a lot more focus on, of course, because we have got different developers, right? You didn't need to be a hardcore engineer the same way as you do working on a game engine. So you got people who were making apps or other things who now came in, UI, UX designers who hadn't worked on games before. So really like this new influx of people also in mobile. So that's what we got really excited about that.
All right. Well, it's more fast-paced, very different than
Sure.
other platforms, obviously. So, Multiscription, how did
Yeah.
you see the opportunity that the world is moving to subscription space? Because you started in 2019, so you're one of the
Yeah.
early ones who actually saw that future is coming
Yeah.
on the multi-subscription, on the subscription services. So, how did you
Yeah.
see the opportunity? How did you start?
So it was actually a couple of things. I think it was around 7 years ago. I met my co-founder Martin Walfes, who's currently the CEO of Thunderful Group in Sweden, but at that time was mostly known for having founded Massive Entertainment, now Ubisoft Massive. And we started talking, and we realized we had some of the similar ideas, and it was actually a lot of different things coming together. So what we saw was that there were so many great games out there that don't get the sort of financial reward that they deserve. Games that, small game teams that have to close, games that are not sustainable, games that have to put in, let's say, dark pattern type monetization because they can't otherwise monetize with the tools that were available at the time. And so we saw that. At the same time, we saw subscriptions coming from outside of the industry. Remember, this was before Apple Arcade or Google Play Pass was even announced. And we saw this, of course, Spotify. And again, Spotify was quite new at that time. And if you told me 15 years ago that no one would ever be buying MP3 files again, I would be like, what? Because back then iTunes was the thing, right? Everything was about CDs were gone, now you're buying on iTunes. So the idea of subscription was really new then. And we thought, okay, you know what? People who play games, they also listen to music. They also watch movies. So they are familiar with subscription from Spotify. They are familiar with subscription from HBO, for example. They know the model. Let's apply it. And then the last part, because now you have the problem, you have the solution. And then at the same time, we had the experience. So obviously, Martin is an extremely experienced game developer and a super passionate game guy altogether. He loves games. He lives and breathes for games. He's a traditional bedroom coder guy. Also, that's how he grew up.
Mhm.
And so we had that experience. We had the knowledge about the games, we had the passion to help them. At the same time, I had a lot of experience with subscription and a battle pass like model, which we ran at a company I worked with called Movistar Planet. I also worked on the early stages of models like this when I was at IO that sort of in different ways got into later editions. And so I was really interested in these new models and had experience working with them. A subscription battle pass. And a battle pass is really just, not to be too technical, but it's really just a non-auto renewable subscription. So we had the mechanics. So now we put all these things together and it was okay, there's an opportunity for the company. At the same time, I think it was Martin's idea to have this, the way we integrate it into the game, that we have a model where instead of the games coming into the subscription and be part of a walled garden, the subscription is integrated into each game, which means that we could target the players in the games they're already playing. So this new approach of instead of just creating an app where you can download that you can subscribe to, and through that app you can play other games, which is a nice idea in itself, we just had a different way of integrating the benefits and the subscription into the games, which all these things came together. The timing was right. We were able to raise funding from a really, really good group of angel investors, primarily from Sweden, but also from Denmark and Germany. So we just got off really good, and this was again, as I said, this was before Apple Arcade and Google was announced. And to be honest, I think we spent a lot of time back then teaching about subscription. So when they announced Google and Apple, I was super excited because now there were other people teaching about subscription in games as well. They do it a bit differently than us, which means that now we have to explain why we do it differently, but at least we didn't have to be the ones kicking in the doors anymore for subscription. And I've had so many meetings 5 years ago at GDC and Gamescom with people saying subscriptions will never work in games. And these companies now have subscription in most of the games. And 7 out of 10 of the top grossing games have either subscription or battle pass. So it was. I think the proof is in the pudding there.
Well, that's why I said you're one of the early ones who saw the opportunity. On this show, I interviewed mostly the game studio founders. It's a founder story, so actually it's just happened. You might be the first one from the platform service side. When you were raising funds, what is the thing that the investors believed? Was it the subscription or the service or the possible traction? Obviously, like the future revenue and everything. But when it comes to SaaS, like in general platforms, most of the investors see something else and they want attraction.
So we had experience, right? And I think it's never too late to start a company. I think, focusing on the founder part here, I think founding a company when you're 40, it's more difficult because you're more settled. I had kids and mortgage and all that you need to feed, but you have a lot more experience. And it's easier to raise money. You have a bigger network. You can reach out to and all that. So I mean, this is just if the other potential would-be founders listening, I would just say it's never too late. Like actually, there's some big bonuses to doing it later in your career. You've also just learned a lot. Like you have a lot of skills. So I think that's a big benefit from that. So that's really what they invested in. Moving on, of course, I think with the SaaS model compared to a game investor, it is the traditional SaaS metrics they're looking at. It's your your recurring revenues and your churns and all these things that are typical when you have a subscription that they're looking at. And I think that has sometimes could be a challenge because a lot of the game investors that are in the game space, they invest in game content. But there's a huge difference from investing in a game content and investing in a B2B or B2B2C in our case, SaaS subscription service. It's different metrics, it's different go-to-market strategies and all that. So I think some of the things that we saw early was finding the right investor. So there's a lot of SaaS investors out there that are not particularly focused on games, but back then, a lot of them, when they saw that we were working with games, they're like, we're not games, but we're trying to say, yeah, but we're SaaS. We're not just games. And I think in the beginning, we were landing between two chairs a lot with investors. We were not the right fit for content investors because they invest in games and game teams. We're not making games. And we were too weird for the SaaS people because they didn't understand how games work, right? They didn't know what a publisher, they don't know what a publisher is and developer is. Like they don't know what's the difference. They don't know about live ops and they don't know any about this stuff. So we were too weird for them. I would say since then, and I said, as you said, we founded a couple of years ago now. So a lot have changed. And I think there's a lot more investors now that come from the SaaS tech B2B space into games and are investing in platforms, invested in services that now bridge the two. And also some of the content investors have started investing into technology and services as well. So now there is sort of an overlap, but it's still pretty niche, to be honest.
Well, you're in Copenhagen,
Correct.
Denmark. The industry is there. Okay, we have IO Interactive, Kilo, tactile games, but in general, and I know in Denmark there is this yearly investor founder meeting, which is like very popular. How is the supporting system for the startups?
I think it's really good. I think first of all, opening a company in Denmark is extremely easy. I mean, it's all done online. It takes an hour, and the cash requirements to open a company is still relatively low. I mean, there's a lot of money when you don't have money, but still, it's. I mean, it can be done in an hour online, and then you're up and running. So I think it's that part is super easy. There's a lot of government facilities around it supporting you as an early stage founder, and there's both soft funding, there's an early stage investments from the government. So all that's good. There's a great angel network, and there's also a lot of early stage investors. We don't have a strong, how to say, track record with investing in games content and games technologies. I mean, when there's one technology company that was founded here that's pretty famous called Unity. It was founded here in Copenhagen, and I think it's a bit of a stretch to call it a Danish company now, but at least it was founded here in Copenhagen. But to be honest, not that many Danes got super rich on that because it wasn't the Danish investors. They all said no, not all of them, but a lot of them said no, which they regret. So it wasn't like a lot of Danish people got super rich on that. So I think that has been sometimes a bit of a challenge with that, which is why when you have this event that we talked about called Copenhagen Matchup, it's actually mostly international investors that attend. So we are helping the investors come. But as you said, we have these. I mean, compared to our size, it's a small country, 6 million people. Having IO Interactive, of course, the sort of the grandfather of games here, but also having Subway Surfers here, the most downloaded game in the world. We have Tactile Games, of course, with Lily's Garden, one of the most prominent Match-3 game developers and publishers. Most recently, we have companies like Ghost Ship Games that are really big in PC console. So a lot of things are happening. Actually, I just want to remind myself of a good point here is that Ghost Ship Games were founded by 5 or 6 people who were in the 40s or late 40s even. So, and that became a kind of huge hit because they knew how to make games, right? They didn't have to learn how to make games. So I think that's really strong. But I think what's really interesting now in Copenhagen is there's a lot of things happening on the game tech side and the game services side. And I think I mentioned Unity, I can mention Multiscription, but in between, there's also Game Analytics, Danish company,
Yeah.
or at least it was until it was acquired, but founded here. And we have most recently, there's a company called Dusk. It's also part Danish, at least. They got just raised 8 million funding from their multiplayer platform, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of companies there's a lot of things happening in the game tech space, which I think is really interesting. I think that's because we have in Copenhagen a really strong tradition for investing in SaaS and tech in general. So this sort of overlapping that's really prominent for sure.
So as a founder, it is a good place to be there because there are people who understands the industry and the early age
I
investor.
did.
Yeah.
I definitely think so. And also, as an employer, it's easy to be here because it's a place that people want to move to. It's not a place that people want to move from. And all things work. You don't have to deal with a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of BS. You just focus on making your game and your company. I think it's really strong. Being also, I would say the proximity to Sweden, which is twice in size almost in people, but more like 100 times the size in terms of the games industry. So I think being able to attract people from Sweden. Copenhagen is situated right next to Malmö, one of the like a smaller city in Sweden, but there's more people working in the games industry in Malmö than there is in Denmark and Norway combined, right? So it's such a big hub for game development, and being able to sort of, I wouldn't say leech on that, but collaborate with our Swedish friends and brothers and sisters over there. I think that's a huge benefit. So I think it's a great place to set up, and we have a great games industry now. I mentioned some of the bigger companies, but I mean there's a lot of there's an undergrowth of smaller companies as well that are really thriving.
You worked in game companies, and right now you're running a game tech company. So as a leader, what do you see differences when you manage the team?
To be honest, not much. I think also, as I said, I worked a little bit outside of games, and also there I didn't find there was much. It's about a leader. It's about the same thing. You need to achieve the vision for the company. You need to make sure that the work is distributed. You need to make sure that the company is running. All of that is the same. I think the only slight difference in measurements and success is in games. It can be hard to measure success in the same way because it's really about making people happy. How do you measure happiness in a game? You can measure your sales, but you can have low sales because some marketing campaign didn't work, or you can have very high sales because you got a good marketing campaign. Doesn't mean that people really like your game. Or it could be given away for free as part of your whatever Xbox subscription. So you don't really know. So there you have an extra layer of how do we measure the happiness of the people. It's a bit easier here. I think it's more pure working in a company that supports a game with monetization like we do. I think sometimes in a games company the topic about monetization is really touchy. A lot of people don't like the idea of making money on the games. Well, they like the idea of making money, but they don't like the idea of implementing features that make the money. If you know what I mean. I've had many how to say one-on-ones and meetings with people who've said we shouldn't put in more monetization features, and then immediately after talk about wanting a salary increase without without seeing the irony in that. So it's I think for us now it's because we're talking about monetization, the typically dirty, touchy subject all the time, it's much more easy to do. So I think that's a slight difference. But in terms of running a company, you still have to make software that works. You still used to do user testing. You still need to use your empathy to, you know, lead both the people in the team, but also, in terms of the users, the customers, and all these things. So I think it's the jump was very little, but it's quite interesting to see in the industry how you get perceived differently because you from making games to being a service provider you're still there's still this thing about service providers being sort of like second tier citizens in the games industry compared to the noble games developer. And you sort of, and I mean, you and I have talked about this before about who you are as a person is not reflected by your job, right? I'm still Teis. I was Teis when I made games, and I'm also Teis when I'm making monetization for games. But people have sort of a different perception of you depending on what's on your business card.
Well, we are both in B2B space, right? Like we talk with the companies, and it's not like we can get 100 users tested out and then tweak a tool. Obviously, you've been sponsoring our events from the beginning, and it was good times. Right now, it's a very tough time. So, what do you see the biggest challenge right now as someone who is doing the B2B side of things in this current economy?
I can say that the stories on LinkedIn and other places about how tough it is to raise money now, it's actually true. Like sometimes there's a lot of whining, but I think this is it's actually true. There are, of course, the overall economy, the overall uncertainties in the world is definitely affecting it, and that trickles down into the smaller startups like us. I can say that B2B, I think the B2B sales part is difficult because we have consolidation in the way that we have some very big players, pun intended, in the space in terms of on the B2B service side, and that, how to say, sort of saturating the markets and are able to really spray out their message. And the smaller guys, it's much more difficult. You kind of drown in that. I would say some things that we have had a lot of success with is cold calling. Like you didn't think that was going to be successful, right? It was suggested to me by one guy from the team who joined. He had experience with it. We've been going mainly to conferences also as I mean Moby Dictum, which I really really enjoy, and I've always enjoyed. But there's only one Moby Dictum a year plus the networking events, right? So you need to do something in between. So we've been thinking about it. We have tried different ways to reach out, and we started calling, and that really works. I mean, it's super weird, but people like talking to people. Like it's good old fashion, you can ask the question immediately. Yeah, so
Very
that's
cool.
actually really efficient.
Yeah, no one gets calls anymore. So we are recording this on 31st of July, and I got a call today in one of the billion-dollar payroll companies. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I know you, and we don't have a big team right now, so I will call you back. He's like, I have a question. Okay, shoot. One question answered. Another question. I'm like, I said no, and you still try to get data from me. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this is very interesting because you're like you want to be polite. Like if by default, if you're not a a-hole, you're a polite person, so you don't want to
yeah,
shut it down. But if it's an email, delete, move on. So the cold
yeah.
calling is definitely like a good tip, especially for the ones who are watching this from the B2B space. That's a good tip.
And and I would say, Bajon, just on that topic, is that you can do cold calling many ways, right? And we our brand, we have some brand values, and one of them is how we behave and communicate is being friendly, helpful, and supportive. And when we call someone, that's also we are friendly, we're helpful, and we're supportive. So our aim is to help people. We have a really good track record in then getting. We're not selling anything on the first phone call. That's another thing. It's like what you do there is you find out if you're interested. You book a meeting where you can talk about it. The first phone call should not be more than 5-10 minutes maximum, 5 minutes. But the good thing is now you said you ask questions. The good thing is when you do these calls is that you can ask the questions and you can ask the questions back. Now you knew the company, right? So you didn't have to ask. But if we call and we're a fairly unknown company in some areas, they can actually ask us, "Oh, what were you doing again? Oh, okay, this actually sounds interesting." So I think that has really worked for us. I think that's something to do in the B2B. I wouldn't say instead of going to the conferences, I would still really recommend that. I think again the face to face is important, but I think in terms of doing AI outreach on LinkedIn,
Yeah,
I just pick up the phone. I mean, it's not that difficult.
that's a good tip. One thing about the because this is a founder stories, we don't go too much detail on the product or products in general, games or game tech doesn't matter. The tool you have is called Unleashed, and the company is
Yes.
called Multiscription. So usually in our space, if you don't have like multiple products, the company and the product is called same. When did you decide to call the product in a different way? What's the vision overall in multi-subscription to be built like other products or focusing on Unleashed?
So actually, Multiscription was a name that Martin came up with, and it's really the name for the business model, which is you have multiple subscriptions in one subscription, thereby multi-subscriptions, multi-subscription. So that's the idea of the business model. That became the model for the company. But we realized two things. First of all, we realized that it was a really bad name to pitch. Like it's not a great brand name. It's a technical description that carries no emotions, no energy. It's hard to pronounce, and it doesn't look good, like visually. All kinds of things wrong with it. So we worked with an external team on finding a better one, and we came up with Unleashed, which we think is much better, and we came up with a whole brand of that. So that's one side. Another part of it is actually going back to the investors. Like we are a subscription service company. Our first subscription service is Unleashed. Second one could be something else. And I think it's the same if you call I work for a company called Movie Star Planet. First, because that was the name of the game. So now we made a second game that was not called Movie Star Planet, and a third game, and a fifth game, and a sixth game. And suddenly you had one company and one game in the company called the same, and all the others, it just felt like they were like stepchildren, right? It's just like you have IO Interactive and you have Hitman,
Yeah.
right? They created the first game. They could also just have called the company Hitman. And so I think that's the idea. So we were also really telling ourselves and telling the investors that we saw this branch out, because that was the first question we got from investors outside of games in particular. Said, okay, what? Because they don't know how big games are, so they were asking, okay, so what's outside of these weird toys? Like what's the actual possibilities? Could you go into other areas? Yeah, we talk about we do this for newspapers. We can do this for all kinds of other services. Every place you have a fragmented market, you can have a subscription that gives you benefits across. This could also be, let's say, if you like to take pictures with your phone, you're going to have a lot of photo editing apps on your phone that you have to pay for individually. Imagine if you could have one subscription that gave you some of the benefits across all those, and that we can then have different products for. Or maybe we create a mobile, sort of a web subscription that's different. Maybe we at some point include web in the Unleashed. Maybe we create a new subscription that's called something else that's for web. That's all these are possibilities. So that's actually why.
Yeah, in game companies, it's common that a company is called something else and the game is called something else, because I think from the beginning, all the founders that think that this won't be the end and there will be other games. But when it comes to SaaS or like a B2B, the company and the tool is usually the same, aka Moby Dictum is. But I tend to do everything under Moby Dictum, so that's a strategy that I should evaluate. So you envision that there will be other tools in the future, so that makes sense.
I just want to say that I think for you it makes sense because you are creating. It's like an entity, right? Everything it goes into the Moby Dictum entity. That is the coverage, the events, the memberships, and everything. So I think that works in that sense. I think it's when you're talking about like Facebook, for example. Now you have Facebook that also owns Instagram. So that's weird. Like now, so of course, now they changed name. They had to do that now, right? So I think that's an example of going the other direction. But I think for Moby Dictum, it's more like you have different features under the same umbrella. So I think it makes total sense for you. I like Moby Dictum as a name as well.
Thank you. I came up good. Yeah, it's very memorable. Well, this is a classical question in this series. How did you come up with the name? But you kind of answered, but you can maybe explain that moment. Like, okay,
Yeah, it wasn't a big sort of eureka moment. It was like anything else, hard iterative process, going in a wrong direction, finding out what we wanted to do. Also, working with Martin on finding out what do we have different styles and different ideas and all that. So having to compromise on that. And then what was very important for us again was to find a name and a brand identity that could work across any game. So we said, how will Unleashed look in this game? How will the name look? How will the brand identity, the colors, the shapes, everything look in this game? And we took a lot of games and we saw how they would look. And it worked out really well in all of them. I think so, at least. And we needed something that would clearly stand out from the brand. So if you see our branding, also from clearly stand out from the games, it's very different. We have a black background which you use as well, but we have a very clear 100% black background and some very simple colors on top to stand out from a game when you get the pop-up, so you can see, okay, this is something different, because the games are so over the top that we had to go the other way. And also it can work at all, everything from, there are black and white games out there that you need to work with. There's several of those. And there are these super over colorful, match 3 games that you also need to look good with. So that's how we came up with. And as I said, we work with an external agency. And I would say one thing that I'm really happy with that we've done in the company is that every time we've had a thing we needed to do, we've worked with experts on it. So we have changed our sales process. Well, we work with an exemplary, brilliant sales consultant who has helped us recreate the whole pipeline. We said we had the brand. Well, we worked with one of the best branding experts, a Swedish guy, one of the best in the region. So we worked with him, and we had some development we needed to have done. Okay, then we find the right guys for that. And every time we reach out and we find the right people and work with them. And I think that comes with the maturity that I talked about earlier, that it's not about me, right? It's not about my ego, that it has to be my thing. It's important for me that it's the best thing or the right thing. And for that, I work with someone because I'm used to, from my career, working with experts. Like, that's the great thing about working in games, is that you meet so many experts, like whether it's a brilliant animator or brilliant rendering programmer, you're used to working with people who know so much more about their area than you do. So I think that's that was the strategy. We work we work with you with Moby Dictum. We work with a PR company. We work with all kinds of people to make sure that what we did was the right thing at the right quality that we needed.
Yeah, working with experts helps
Yeah.
getting the ideas. Well, my final question would be: you mentioned about the age a couple of times that you start when you're 41. A couple of guys on their 40s started their, like their project. It's quite successful right now. So, from two different angles, what would you tell a 40-year-old entrepreneur right now who is starting? This is one. And second is, what would you tell to someone who's starting a B2B game tech company right now?
So if I was to say something to a 40-year-old, I would say you need to have a bit more saved up than you think. You're not going to be, it's not going to take a year and a half like you thought. When I started, there's going to be like 18 months and then exit, and then I'm back to, then we go on holidays again. It's a bit longer, and it's a longer stretch. I also would say make sure that you speak with your partner about this, that because it's I've always worked a lot. And in some ways, I don't think I'm working more now than I've done at other periods, like, when you had to get an E3 demo out the door and all that kind of stuff. So I've worked more in my life, but I think this kind of pressure that's on, because you're always looking at the runway, you're always looking at creating scale. And if you don't do it, you have nothing. You're constantly trying to build the traction. That's harder and on you in a different way. You can't take holiday in the same way, especially when you're alone in the beginning. I used to have this joke that I said when I went to the toilet, the company closed and it opened again when I came out, because there was no one working when I was there, because there was just one guy in the beginning, right? So that's the idea, right? And I think so. It's not like you go on holiday and you come back and people have sorted things out. Now it is, because I have a team that's really cool, but a long period is that. So I think those are the kind of the talks that you need to understand what that means in terms of sort of, also because when I say this, because when you're 40, a lot of people, not everyone of course, but a lot of people have either a partner or kids, and that means that you have a lot of personal freedom, let's say, taken away from you, or sort of suspended for a period of time. Just things that you don't want to miss. And it is hard, because when going to many conferences I do, they are bound to land on a school event, right? They're about to land on a big, when your daughter has a big play at school, and when you're in a company, that can also happen, but the repercussions of not going are maybe a bit smaller than if you're a startup and you need to meet that investor who's only going to be there once in that conference. That's the one change you have, for example, because you can't afford the plane ticket, so you got the tickets paid from somewhere, and just stuff like that. It's different. So that's the first, I think, for 40-year-old. And then I will say, do it. Absolutely do it. If you want to do it now. I mean, that's the best time is now to do things. It's always the best time. It's great. It's a great experience, and it's great getting to put all your expertise and your experience into play. The second, for B2B, I would also say do it. I think especially B2B now in the games industry is the one thing to do. I think it's much more challenging starting a games company. I think what we'll see over the coming years is some consolidation within the games. I think we had this huge explosion in games companies and number of games. That's going to go down, because it's becoming unsustainable, I think. But what we see is now with the web stores coming up, a lot of things happening there. We see alternative app stores. I mean, they are also coming. All these things are happening. And with that, more things will spawn around that. I mean, subscriptions that we do, it's going to come, other kinds of monetization. And I think that we're coming into a period now in games where we're becoming more professional, where it's not just about making a fun game, but it's also about making a sustainable business for your company. And part of that is for example, having a payroll system. Like, you can't just use an Excel sheet and Google Drive, right? You need to have your monetization, your users, your all these things in order. If you put in a web shop, you need to have all the backend done and all that kind of stuff. I think we're coming into a period where that's going to be a lot more prevalent. So I would say, I think it's the right time to start a company. But I don't wait. I think a couple of years from now, you're going to have so many big players that you're going to be lost in that. I think from a pitching perspective and a business perspective, I would say don't pay too much attention to the feedback you get from investors. I think it might sound controversial, but the number of times I've moved the team slide around in my slide deck because every investor had an opinion about where the team slide should be. Oh, it should be first because we're investing in the team. And no, it should be last so you end with it. Oh, it should be here. Stuff like that. Everyone has some feedback, so don't pay too much attention to that. And then I would say be structured. I think that's a personal experience for me. I've had a tendency, and still have, tendency to start way too many things. I have both for the company, for the team, for myself, just starting. And I think doing fewer things is something I'm trying to learn myself, do fewer things. But I get super excited and I want to talk to as many investors at Slush as I can. But maybe that's not really the point, because if you talk to 25 investors at Slush plus all the business cards and the chats you had over beers and sauna, now you have 50 conversations you need to follow up on. And then that they introduce you to another 50, and suddenly you have 100, and you're also building a product. So I think being more focused, being more, instead of starting, make sure you follow through, being more structured in that. I think that's more like a personal advice for startup, I guess, than anything. So I think that's the thing. And then last thing for B2B to answer your question is to look at partnerships. How can you build through partnerships? I think if you look at some of the successes out there, there are companies adjacent to you. How can you work with them? How can you and focus on not making, don't let the deal fall through where you are discussing 5-10% splits. Doesn't matter. Split 50-50 if there's a revenue. Doesn't matter. It's about growing. Or get stuck up in contracts about how many hours you should spend, or they should spend. Doesn't matter. Make the deals, make the partnerships, make the collaborations, grow together. Think about that. Yeah, I think those would be my advice. And if people want more advice, they're free to reach out. I'll happily take a coffee and talk more.
Well, Teis, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing the experience. I think I will see you in October in our conference. Yeah. You didn't miss for the last 2 years, so I'm counting on that. And we always surprises during our conferences. You'll see. Well, thank you so much and good luck. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.